Hello and welcome to another podcast from Odell Technology. Today we're joined by Mal Hebblewhite, President and CEO, and Dr Kyle Berean, PhD, Head of Clinical Affairs, both co-founders from Atmo Biosciences.
So I'm Mal Hebblewhite. I'm President and CEO, co-founder of Atmo Biosciences. My background is as an engineer. I trained as an aerospace engineer, but have spent most of my career in biomedical engineering and medical devices. I've also got an MBA from Kellogg, and I've been working on and in Atmo for how long is it, Kyle? 9 years. Um,
Long.
a long time. So yeah, we've devoted quite a lot of time and energy to things, and finally getting some traction and having some success. So
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Kyle, what about your good self?
Hi, I'm Dr. Kyle Berean. I'm one of the co-inventors of the Atmo Gas Capsule, and I'm a co-founder of Atmo Biosciences. I also trained as an engineer, as an electrical engineer. I did a PhD in material science, where I worked on gas permeable membranes, specifically for measuring gases inside of a gastrointestinal tract. And I did worked as a postdoc on the first in human study at the university, where we spun out the IP into Atmo Biosciences, where I've worn many hats from CTO. I've done a lot of work within the manufacturing space of Atmo, and now I head clinical affairs.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. You've achieved a great deal in a short space of time, so congratulations. I suppose the important question for me is what was the original problem you saw in gut motility diagnosis that made you think we can do better?
so Kyle's probably best positioned to answer this one, given that the work that he conducted at RMIT University predated the formation of Atmo Biosciences and the spinning out of the IP after I licensed it into Atmo. So perhaps if Kyle wants to take that one in terms of the original concept.
No problems. So one of the biggest issues in the motility space is that patient-reported symptoms are non-specific to the area of the issue. And so what we provide with our wireless motility capsule is region-specific information across the entire GI tract. So a patient may report to the doctor with symptoms that are indicative of an upper GI motility problem, but the data says that they're just as likely to have a problem within the colon as well. So what we provide is objective measures for a more personalized treatment approach than what the standard of care currently was.
Okay, all right. So take us back to the moment the idea first clicked. What was the spark?
Well, it was actually the formation of the technology was all about trying to improve on breath tests for more functional gut disorders. And so we made a gas measuring device that was measuring gases at the source of production rather than this indirect method of the breath test. Now, one of the things as we were developing this technology is to do any functional gut disorder, you need to know where you are in the GI tract. And so by knowing where you are in the GI tract, you've just created a wireless motility capsule. So whilst we can do whole and regional gut transit at the moment for motility disorders such as gastroparesis and slow transit constipation, it's not the only indication that we may be applied to in the future.
And Stephen, that's the potential that caught my attention was the ability of the capsule to sense these gases, which were already recognized as clinically valuable biomarkers, and the idea that this was a platform that could be potentially applied to a range of functional gut disorders, which, as Kyle says, are really poorly served because there's no biomarkers or diagnostic test that's sensitive or specific enough, at least, for conditions like irritable bowel syndrome or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, for that matter. So there are these many and large unmet clinical needs that could be better served by a device like this that has the capabilities that it has in terms of understanding its location, as Kyle said, and then using that location-specific ability to then measure or detect these clinically valuable biomarkers, of which, gases are some of the more important ones, and certainly the ones that we can detect.
Okay, so what is the actual product?
So it's a system, the most prominent component of which is an ingestible capsule, which is of a similar size and composition to a lot of the endoscopy capsules, camera capsules that are out there. So similar materials, similar size, weight. Unlike camera capsules, we do not have a camera in the capsule. Instead, we have a bunch of other sensors like temperature, relative humidity. There are 2 gas sensors in the capsule that are sensitive variously to hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. We monitor the antenna performance because there's an antenna here sending information out wirelessly to a small receiver or recorder that the patient wears or carries. And the data are downloaded from that recorder after the study is over, after the capsule's been passed. And the recorder indicates to the patient that the test is over and lights up when the capsule is excreted in a bowel movement. That recorder is then downloaded via a tablet and synchronized to the cloud. And the clinician can then log into a web-based portal to read a study, generate a report, make a diagnosis. But the capsule itself has those sensors that I mentioned, plus an accelerometer. And the accelerometer looks at the orientation of the capsule. And it also, if you analyze the data from that accelerometer in the appropriate way, you can get information about contractility in the various regions of the gut. So differences in contractility between the stomach, the small bowel, and the colon. And we actually have a 510K, a US FDA 510K pending at the moment to include that feature in the product. So all of those sensors and those modalities that I mentioned are used to understand the location of the capsule. And we've conducted a pivotal clinical trial in the US at 11 sites, published data on that, and that was the basis on which the FDA granted us a 510K clearance last year for a first indication in diagnosing dysmotility conditions like gastroparesis or delayed gastric emptying and slow transit constipation and other dysmotility conditions on the basis of our ability to understand the location of the capsule in the gut, whether it's in the stomach, the small bowel, or the colon. And all of those sensors that are on board the capsule help us to locate the capsule and understand whether it's in one organ or another.
Okay. Okay. So what does it let clinicians understand that they couldn't easily before?
So what this allows and what this gives the clinician is an objective measurement of location of motility disorder and the degree of motility disorder. As I referred to before, that the presenting symptoms of the patient are non-specific and often don't tell you enough to treat them. So we give whole and regional gut transit to allow for a personalized care approach by the clinician.
And
Okay.
Stephen, the alternatives that are available at the moment that this replaces with one test are variously 2 or 3 other tests. So if the clinician suspects that there's an upper gut disorder, delayed gastric emptying from the stomach, for instance, they can send the patient off to conduct a gastric scintigraphy procedure, which is where, first of all, they have to be referred to radiology, which could take, in the US, it takes months. They have to go to radiology and eat a radio-labeled meal and then sit around in the clinic getting imaged to understand how slowly or quickly that meal empties from the stomach. And that takes at least 5 hours. And that only gives you information about the stomach. Similarly, if you suspect that there's a lower gut issue, you would send them off to radiology and they would ingest some little plastic markers, opaque, radio-opaque plastic markers that over days get distributed throughout the gut. And you have to come back as the patient to radiology over the course of several days to get x-rayed, to understand the distribution of these markers and see if there's a problem with the lower gut in terms of motility. Now, it's rarer for an institution or a facility to conduct a small bowel transit study, but it is possible. And there are also a handful of facilities in the US, at least, that can conduct whole gut scintigraphy studies, all of which are really burdensome and inconvenient for not just the clinician, but also definitely for the patient. We are combining all of those tests into one in terms of offering the clinician and the patient a convenient, radiation-free alternative to give information, as Kyle said, on regional and whole gut transit through stomach, small bowel, colon, and whole gut. And that's why it's resonating with customers and clinician researchers, because it's giving them something that they either wouldn't be able to acquire in terms of data, or it would be quite inconvenient and burdensome.
Okay, so what was the hardest step in moving from a research concept to a product clinicians could actually use?
Oh, we haven't got enough time on this podcast, Stephen, for
Okay.
that.
So you spend so much time creating and inventing the product, then going for regulatory approval once you've received secured US FDA 510(k) clearance. What then became the focus?
Yeah, so as soon as you get clearance, you want to leverage what you have, and turn it into a commercial product, right? And go from being a developmentally focused company and a product development focused company to being a commercially focused company. And we've been going through that transition over the last 9 months. But to answer your jokes aside, to answer your first question in terms of what the most difficult process is, it's multifold. I mean, this is one of the things that makes medical devices difficult, is that you need to ensure that first of all, your regulatory pathway is appropriate and is feasible. You also want to make sure that when you get through this process, reimbursement is possible and is profitable, not just for us as a company, but for the clinician. So reimbursement, regulatory, after technical feasibility and proof of concept and proof of technical feasibility is shown, and then getting the clinical data, obviously, to be able to put in your regulatory application and get it through the FDA. And even then, things are not assured. I mean, we had a misstep with the FDA with our first 510(k), where it was actually rejected on the basis of fraudulent biocompatibility data that we weren't responsible for, but that had been obtained through a contractor. So you can do everything right and still end up with some challenges. But I'd say that they're some of the major hurdles that need to be cleared. And most importantly, you have to surround yourself with the best possible people that you can find at all levels. So I'm talking about not just the team within the company of employees, but your board of directors, your shareholders, your medical advisory board, and key opinion leaders who are supporting you with clinical studies and by getting on the podium and speaking about the product and providing clinical input into the design, development, and clinical trials related to the product. So there's a whole range of areas that have to come together and work well in order for things to be successful. And that's one of the reasons that medical devices are so hard.
So the clearance was supported by a pivotal multi-site clinical study. What did the process teach you both that reshaped the product or go to market?
Well, given that Kyle led that successful pivotal trial and did an absolutely stellar job with it, for a really reasonable budget, maybe he can talk about what sort of lessons he learned and how
I
we're
mean,
applying.
yeah, the lessons that we learned is that you just have to surround yourself with the right people, right? To obtain the right data, to then attract the right customers. So we're in this early commercial growth phase where the type of customer that we get now is super important in nurturing how we grow as a business and shaping how we grow as a business. And so we're attracting clinicians right now that are really interested in scientifically credible data, and that's what we've provided them by surrounding ourselves with the right key opinion leaders and the right investigators within our clinical studies.
Okay, so once you were commercially available in the US from July 2025, or you are, what were the first signals that the market was responding to?
To give us confidence that there was a credible value proposition here.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think early adoption by some of those relationships, some of those customers with whom we'd worked up relationships, as Kyle said, that was a good sign. And once they got confidence and comfort that they were getting reimbursed for the product under a Category 1 CPT code that exists for it, thanks to the predicate device, they then were able to not only conduct studies, but then purchase additional product with confidence. And we've had customers who have purchased additional hardware to expand their footprint on the basis of the quality of the product, the quality of the data that it provides them, and the clinical utility of those data, and their confidence that it's going to be reimbursed. And all of that combined has meant that we've gotten very good traction early on with mainly private practice clinicians because they can move quickly and they're not as encumbered with some of the constraints that larger institutions or hospital systems have, which are generally related to things like IT and cybersecurity, which are all able to be overcome, but they just take time. So most of our early traction has been with private practices who can move quickly and make decisions fast.
So, okay, so where do you think the real cut through is coming from? Workflow, patient experience, diagnostic confidence, or economics?
All of the above.
All of the above. All of the
Okay.
above. Definitely,
I mean,
it helps having the economics and that it's all contained within their practice, right? So as Mal referred to previously, the other options are referring out to radiology, right? And so they lose these patients for periods of time and they don't see any of that revenue and they may never see those patients again. But if they're doing all of this testing within their clinic, then the patients are within their control and it's under their umbrella.
the product needs to be reliable. It needs to be easy to incorporate into their clinical workflow, as Kyle says. It needs to be easy to interpret the data and read the study. And our studies are very, very easily read. We have a wizard that leads the clinician through the interpretation process. So all of those things, along with it being cost effective in terms of setup cost, and as I said before, the clinical utility of the data. So it's providing them with actionable insights into dysmotility and its objective data. As Kyle said, the credibility of the data coming from the 11 US sites and the one Australian site in our pivotal trial, and the fact that we've published in multiple publications and had so many clinical studies completed and administered more than 1,500 of these capsules over the course of years, and that we've got this exemplary safety record where we have not had a severe device-related adverse event. All of that combined really resonates, I think, and provides clinicians with some comfort and gives us additional credibility.
Okay, so you say 35 million people in the US with symptoms indicative of a functional gut disorder consult doctors for bowel problems. How many of those can you help?
Well, I think all of them, because these symptoms, as Kyle said, are so non-specific, and there are so few tools available to clinicians that there's no doubt that this unlocks insights into these common and debilitating conditions that are related to all sorts of different functional gut disorders. So we would really like to be positioning this as a baseline screening or diagnostic test, because in order to understand the way that your gut is working, it's a long tube with various organs located in it. And if as a baseline, it would be useful to understand how fast or slow the contents are moving through that system. And that's one of the things that this provides. And then you're able to use that as baseline knowledge in approaching many of these functional gut disorders that are so prevalent.
Okay, so what have you learnt about selling into the US healthcare that surprised you most?
I think as an outsider to the US, it's very difficult to understand really the complexity of the US healthcare system until you actually start engaging with it. And so there are so many different levels to the healthcare system that are quite regionally specific. So if you are trying to get reimbursement from an insurer that might be national, it has a different management within Massachusetts than it does in Pennsylvania, and that's really was an unknown for me as a technical developer going into the US.
Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
I'd echo those thoughts. I think um, the extent to which the US system, particularly when it comes to reimbursement, but also the purchase process, sometimes in depending on the nature of the customer and the system, but how opaque it is and how complex it is. I think it's even surprising to Americans or to people who have worked in it for long periods of time. So, having a Category 1 CPT code in place is a huge advantage. Particularly if that code is profitable and if it's getting paid, and if it offers a compelling value proposition for the clinician or the institution, which ours does. The good news is that what we're doing is also good medicine, because it's providing them with information that's clinically useful and that otherwise would not be easily obtainable. So I think that the offering that we have is ticking a lot of boxes. I also think that the just the scope of operations in the US that is required for you to tackle that market is surprising, and it's not possible to go after the entirety of the market all at once. You really need to partition things or segment things in order to focus on certain geographic regions to begin with, and then have some success and scale from there.
Okay. So with the upcoming capital raise, how are you prioritizing the next phase of growth? New indications, deeper penetration with existing customers, or geographic expansion in the States?
Yeah, so I think we want to be really focused on certain geographic regions. We have had a deliberate focus on the Northeast to begin with. We've got customers all over the country, and that's by virtue of the interest that's been generated and just demand from customers that we've either had relationships with or that have heard about our clearance and are interested in the product. But in terms of our concentration and our focus, it was deliberate in terms of the Northeast, and that's paid dividends because we have a cluster now of customers in the New York City area, for example, and the Northeast generally. We will expand beyond that initial region now that we have a value proposition that's been proven out, and we think that we can scale things. We'll do that in a sustainable way. So one of the first things that we'll be doing is taking on some salespeople, and we will be entering certain targeted markets. But we're looking to learn from the successes that we've had with customers to date and try to replicate that. And that includes the increase in utilization of capsules of the consumable portion of the system wherever we can, because ultimately we want to not only attract new customers, but we want them to be using the product um, to an extent that that's viable for them and their practice, but also is profitable for us.
Okay, so what would you do differently looking back on the experiences you've had? And I mean, how would you do anything differently?
Well, I'll take this one, Mal, for a start. I don't
It's another
think,
one of those that's how much time have we got here?
well, exactly. So, researcher perspective and then spinning out the company, I don't think I really fully understood what a medical device development took, and I'm not sure I would have undertaken it. The lengthy road and the highs and lows that getting a medical device to market takes. I've learned a lot along the way, but would I have done it again? Maybe I would have just done a direct-to-consumer product instead.
Yeah, I think continuing to incubate the concept, the product, the technology in the relatively safe confines of a university as long as possible is not a bad option, and keeping it there for as long as possible before it's spun out. I would also suggest that if you can, raise as much money as you can, even when you think you don't need it, and be prepared to. We've done this, but be prepared to share in the upside, and offer equity to those trusted advisors and people who are willing to support you along the way. Um, and look, it's difficult to say what you would do differently when you've experienced, COVID, and we've made it through that, and came out the other side and survived and then thrived afterwards. So we've been through some ups and downs, as Kyle says, but a lot of these things you can't predict at the time.
Okay, so finish this sentence for me if you wouldn't mind. Commercialization isn't a straight line because.
So many things that you cannot predict or manage for, and you have to have contingency plans, and happiness in life as in business is how well you deal with plan B. So you need to have alternatives available. But commercialization is not a straight line, because whether it's regulatory reimbursement or the development of the product, um, there are many hurdles that arise that you can't possibly predict.
I'll just say that there's changing market forces that means that you have to change the way that you're going to tackle the problems that they're experiencing, and you just have to be open to doing that and not stuck in a singular path.
All right, well, thank you both very much for today's chat. I look forward to hearing about greater success in the next 6 months. We'll come back to you. And I wish you all the very best of luck to both of you.
Well, thanks
Thanks,
very much.
Stephen.